Good afternoon. My name is Sai Katara, president and co-founder of Headlight. Just wanted to start by saying a big thank you to VAA, Trent and Caroline for having me and including me in today's session. We've been working collaboratively for many years with VAA, and there's, I'm sure, lots of familiar names in attendance today. For those unfamiliar with Headlight, we are a photo-based inspection technology company formerly known as Pavia Systems. We've been around for, it's crazy, almost 16 years, serving public agencies, engineering firms, contractors, and material suppliers. And our core focus is providing purpose-built technology to organizations in transportation infrastructure. So I often get the question from non-industry folks, why transportation? It's because it is fundamental to how we live our lives. It impacts how we get to see our families, how we get to work. When you start thinking about commerce, the food we eat, the healthcare we receive, none of that happens without a well-functioning transportation system, which provides the foundation upon which we all live our lives. I deconstructed my morning the other day. I went to the fridge to get a little bit of food. Well, without transportation, there's no food in the fridge. Sat at my home office desk to send a few emails. There's no desk without transportation. And then I drove to see my mom later that day. And, how does that happen without the work of people in this industry? Side note, I drive over a floating bridge. It's a bridge that floats. How does that work? Well, professionals in this industry figured it out. So, what it means, I think, speaking to the folks on this call, the jobs that y'all have are important. And they're important for a reason bigger than any one of us. And so that's part of the reason we've loved being a part of the industry and working with VAA members. Our lens of contributing to the industry has always been creating people-centric, purpose-built innovation to solve fundamental business challenges for the industry. Today's topic will be a dive into innovation and one example of an approach taken specifically around the materials verification process. Before we dive into that directly, I wanted to start more broadly with an idea made famous by Henry Ford. He said, if asked what they wanted, people would have told me faster horses. That idea always made me stop and think. Mr. Ford is saying generally, people have difficulty seeing beyond the frame of what the current state of the practice is to imagine something different. I've always interpreted that as saying, yes, always listen and really understand the problem that the people you're working to serve, what are the problems that they have, but understand that they may not yet know how to most effectively solve that problem. Back then it was horses, but he saw another way that ultimately changed transportation forever. And so applying the same idea to our topic, to the critical world of the materials that we use to build our roads and bridges, when looking at the state of the practice for materials verification activities, so specifically material sample tracking, test results, and then of course the overarching sample plan for a project, state of the practice, most likely folks answer, well, there's a form for that. Got the TL59A, 59B, TL60, and on and on. And so let's just take that paper form and, let's just put it in the computer. Let's make it electronic. Give me that thing as a PDF. Give me that thing as a form filler. Give me faster horses. But if we dig a little deeper to really uncover the underlying challenges that both industry and agency face, we'd learn that faster horses don't actually solve the larger underlying problems. In addition, when we rid ourselves of the limitation of life in a paper-based world, does it make sense then to self-impose those same limitations in a digital one? So that's kind of the frame that we started, and let's take a little look at what we learned. So sharing what we learned in peer states, and in Virginia, y'all may or may not face the same challenges, but in our work with contractors and state DOTs and other markets across the country, there were three main challenges identified when it came to the agency's materials quality assurance process. Challenge one, visibility. So let's say on a state job, new dense graded surface course is laid down, it's compacted, then it's cored. That sample is taken in the field on a Tuesday. Then what happens? Well, it's tossed in the back of a truck, driven off, and we feel like we just tossed a coin down a well, still waiting to hear it hit the bottom. So now it's off to the materials lab, and there's lots of questions that we have. You know, where are those cores? Have they arrived at the lab? Is there a big backlog waiting to be tested? Have mine been tested? How'd they do? The answer most of the time, until the whole process is said and done, is I don't know. And there's some good reasons for that, which we'll get into shortly, but this is the typical process where there's simply no visibility into where things are in the sequence. Challenge number 2, timeliness. So a key factor in this process is the timeliness in which things get completed. When will the results be available? 2 days, 2 weeks, a month? Well, the answer, of course, is it depends. And we know there's a lot of work that goes into making sure everything is done right and done effectively. So to that end, we need to ensure that all the focus and all the effort instead is spent on the high value parts of the work versus the administrative overhead that unfortunately goes along with it. So, there's many, many reasons why timeliness is important, but one key reason that we've learned, of course, working with contractors for many years, test results equals payment, right? Y'all did the work, y'all installed the product, and then y'all have to wait till the process is complete to get the dollars. There is a contractor in another state, smaller company that we work with, and payment for state jobs in this particular state happens monthly. Samples were sort of taken prior to month end, but results didn't actually make it back until after. So this contractor had to float those dollars for an additional month, which put them through a tough squeeze during a tough time in the market. There's payrolls to make, people's families depending on those dollars. As a small business owner myself, I know what it feels like. We've been fortunate enough, knock on wood. One thing I'm super proud of is over the last, 15 years, we've never missed an employee payroll, not one time. And suffice it to say, in building the business, there were periods when as co-founders, our credit cards were to the hilt and there wasn't enough cash to pay ourselves. And we were waiting, for work that was completed months prior to get that cash in the door, but we made sure our teams and their families were always taken care of. So we were lucky that way, but stretch it a little further, sometimes it gets tough. So why are things slow? Well, it used to be because there weren't solutions out there, but that's not the case anymore. Now there are ways to accelerate the process immensely. The challenge now is raising awareness on what's now possible and helping influence the will to change. That's the main factor generally. And the other piece to it is having leadership that understands that change is necessary, even though in the short term it may feel inconvenient. Challenge number 3. How many of y'all work in more than one district here in Virginia? Right? Consistency in other states that we've worked in has always been something that's come up. And I don't know if it's a challenge here in Virginia, but in other states, we talk to folks and they struggle with the fact that, you could lay down the exact same surface course in one district as you did in a neighboring district, and then the results that come back are wildly different. Y'all may not have that challenge here, but it certainly does exist in lots of other parts of the country. So what's the impact of inconsistency? It's got impacts on plants, on crews, on techs, really on the whole operation, having to adjust to idiosyncrasies in different locations around a certain owner. It also drastically impacts the scalability of the business and the speed at which contractors can tackle projects that are on deck. In turn, that of course impacts profitability, which impacts every single person that works within a business. So, those are the big 3 challenges in the work that we've done around the country with other states that were identified. There's some interesting underlying reasons for those challenges. Why are things slow? Well, paper is slow, and that's the core of most of the processes that we see even now across the country. You think about it, you physically have to transport a thing from point A to point B. That thing is a piece of paper. So we're sort of at its core talking about comparing the speed of like a homing pigeon to the speed of light. Like that's part of the comparison that we're talking about. Why inconsistent? People do things in different places. How do you get people in different places to do the same things? Well, okay, first and foremost, a process needs to be defined. And then second, the easier that you make the process, the more likely it'll be that everyone will do the same thing because it's potentially easier than what they're doing now. And then the third piece, why no visibility? The current process with most state agencies that they have in place, it's a heavy lift to keep everyone looped in with the status quo process. For example, John from the lab, you could pick up the phone and call you when a sample arrives. And then he could call you when he starts working the first test for that sample and call you after the second test. But then John wouldn't have much time to do the testing itself because he'd be on the phone all day giving updates. So the little practical technology, previously tough hills to climb become much easier efforts. And when they're much easier efforts, they become much more likely to deliver the desired outcomes. So here's the good news. Doesn't always have to be this way anymore. So let's talk more specifically about some proposed and potential solutions to these challenges, starting with the process of material sampling in the field. So I remember hearing stories from our team doing this discovery to get a snapshot of kind of what's the current process like. And they're like, all right, folks in the materials teams and the folks in the field, walk me through the process. We're here, we arrive on the job site, new pavement is put down, it's compacted, it's time to cut your core. What do you do next? Well, the answer was this: let's get back in the truck and drive back to the lab. And we said, wait, why? And they said, well, we need to get a sample ID and we can only do that at the lab. And so we said, all right, good start. Let's write that down as a key thing to try and alleviate and fix. So, all right, now we're back at the lab. We've got to create that sample ID. Walk me through your process. So they're like, all right, let me show you. First, we open up this program, and this is sort of the slides on the left side of the slide here. Then we click this tab, and then we fill in a little bit of information here, and then we click this tab, and then we click that tab, and so on and so forth. They did an end-to-end walkthrough. It was almost like playing a game of Simon Says to generate one sample. And they did it sort of at typical pace, just so we could sort of observe what that pace was. Guess how long it took them to create one sample in their existing process back in the lab? 17 minutes for one sample. Now think about how many samples are taken a day, across how many projects across the state. Like, I wanted to give them all a hug. I felt for them. It was rough. And so modification number 2, which we noted down, was, can we please make it easier for sample creation, for those folks? Show me a simpler process to create that sample, and then make sure that we can do all of that creation out in the field, because that's where the work is happening. That's where the samples are taken. So we did both of those things, and now the end result is sort of the culmination of what it looks like here on the right. Instead of a car ride and another 17 minutes, they're able to generate a sample ID right from the job site. And I think the timing was, they timed it, and instead of 17 minutes, it's now down to 23 seconds. And people are a lot happier right now. And so that sort of streamlining is really what we're trying to get to, where it's not just an incremental benefit, but an order of magnitude, looking at prior processes with innovation and technology that's available today. Step 2. All right, so we created the sample ID. How do you track those samples once they're created? The original way, you write it down either in a book or on a form, and then hope it's legible, and then it gets to the lab and goes to the process. Today, instead, the new way, we've all got mobile phones in our pockets, or whatever your favorite flavor of device is, we've got them. They all have cameras, and all those cameras can read QR codes. So why don't we just leverage that? And we've got additional information on it too, GPS locations, timestamps, all that can come on the phone or the iPad or whatever it is. And we can tie that information to a generated sample ID that we can now do in a short amount of time. that sample ID becomes your handle. And we know that we can tie that directly to the project, the line item, the materials type, the company. All that stuff is now linked to this sample ID, and off we go. So what happens then? It's just a simple scan from the device, and all that info comes right along with it. So that allows chain of custody to be logged at every single handoff point without really much work at all. And so from the job site to the transport of the sample, to the lab intake room, and then even putting a device at each testing station until that full suite of tests is complete. Then finally, the results in real time are available back in the field to both the contractor and the agency. So this is how we, with a much lighter lift for the people involved, we can now get start to finish visibility on where every sample for every line item on every job across the entire agency's program, we now get visibility end to end in what that looks like. And so that adds a big benefit with respect to both visibility and timeliness, which we sort of talked about earlier. So the other question, all right, well, that's great, Sai, but how do you handle the test results themselves? The old process was paper forms, and that's one of the things that I think is one of the challenges, where creating the ability to streamline the old paper process, but not just doing it with filled PDFs. So how do we handle those test results themselves? The solution that ended up getting sort of presented was, hey, let's figure out what are the other challenges that we see in the process. So two key things that we noticed: tons of redundancy. So if you're trying to do a PDF filler, like the header of some of the forms had something like 21 fields. All those fields were already known. They just had to be filled in again and again and again. Well, if you've got this QR code that already has correlation to all that information, boom, in one scan, you're able to quickly alleviate all that redundancy. The other piece, the math. It's always the math. Having to do math always causes issues. And so modern technology, why not just let the smart form sort of do the math for you? And so that's created a lot of benefits with respect to errors as well as timeliness in the process. The other really cool thing about modern sort of data first technologies, since we're not stuck with plain PDF forms as a solution, we can automatically link location information of those samples to the physical GPS coordinates. And now that we have the smart forms, we can tie the testing data together, and now we get a whole new level of visibility into things like this. So now we can look at sort of a map-based interactive view that can provide essentially a density profile for an entire project. And then in the long term, we can now see a similar profile for entire networks of pavements. Show sample locations, test results, material source, all tied to the roadway itself. And so it kind of gets us a huge step closer to getting cradle to grave understanding of performance. And then thinking about it from pavement quality research, benefiting both producers and agencies, we can now see these data sets tied to the networks, understanding sort of the cradle to grave impacts of how that information ties together. So, so thinking back to what we sort of just talked about, right? The set of capabilities that we just kind of jumped to, we really spoke a lot to, all right, how do we address the timeliness challenge? And then how do we really boost visibility in the processes that we talked about? The third one was the age-old problem of consistency. And so I kind of alluded to, all right, why do we see inconsistency in any process? How do you get folks to do the same or a similar thing? Really, it's to first create a process and make sure that that process is way easier than the way they're respectively doing their own thing today. And the easier the process, the more likely it'll be that everyone will do the same thing. So it's sort of a It reminds me of a story years ago when we were first doing discovery for the project inspection side of the house, of some of the stuff that we offer to the market. During deployments initially, we always ask participants, hey, scale of 1 to 10, how comfortable are you with technology? And I remember there was an inspector, 25 years of experience, was like, hey man, I'm a 0. Like, I still got a flip phone and my grandkids have these iPads and I just try and steer clear. And I was like, Mark, you're with me. I can't wait to spend some time with you and learn from your experience. Because I really wanted to dig in with Mark, hey, what's high value with that 25 years of experience really adds, incredible insights into the process that you've got to do day to day. And then what's unnecessary and how do we get that stuff out of your way? And so within a week and a half, Mark turned out to be the #1 source of high quality job site information on a daily basis of everyone else in his cohort. And part of the reason was, the technology, instead of getting in his way and being the friction, which is always the fear, instead, the technology became the lead blocker to sweep away the friction that existed in the status quo process. But they were just accustomed to having to do that year over year over year. And I'll never forget what he said to me after that initial pilot period. He said, remember that first day of training when I told you I was a 0? He's like, well, you took me from 0 to hero. And that has stuck with me ever since. And so in that same vein, we wanted to tackle one of the hardest challenges identified in the process. It's this sort of umbrella capability, and that's the process of developing sort of the overarching sample plan for an entire project and trying to make that easy to generate and of course specific to that project. And so that's where we really try to tie things together to create that seamless sample plan as an overall umbrella capability. It was really interesting developing this because, you sort of start with, we realize we already have all the ingredients. They just haven't been assembled in a way that was useful to date. So for example, when a contract is let and awarded, we've already got all the bid items, all the line items, all the contractors and subs for a job. We know the acceptance criteria based on agency specs. We know the quantities, and then we know the sampling frequencies that are required. So you do a little math, and then what do you get? We know the exact count of all the samples for every line item, all the way up to the project level. So we said, all right, given that, we know that's kind of upfront, and if you make it easy to make adjustments along the way, why don't we create the ability to pre-print the entire book of those QR codes that correlate to every sample that needs to be taken across every line item throughout the duration of the project? Then it makes it real easy to see, hey, did I take all the required samples? What did I miss? And because the approach is modern and it's not tied to form fillers, we can easily now create dashboards to show, hey, red, yellow, green, how are we doing on a line item level, on a project level, and then ultimately, because it's data first, we can bubble it all the way up to a program level. And that's the kind of thing that's possible when you leave the old paradigm in the past and start to embrace a new one. So that was sort of the approach that we applied as we learned that visibility, timeliness, and consistency were key challenges in the materials verification process. By approaching things sort of from a new vantage point, we were able to complement the natural workflow of the work rather than struggling to force the work to match the legacy forms or match the legacy systems. And with that paradigm shift, we hope that we're going to see incredible outcomes for both agencies and for contractors as this starts to roll out across the country. Bottom line, we have a lot of important work to do together as an industry. And we've got a choice in how we do it. Will we choose to propagate the status quo, or will we choose to embrace a new paradigm that will help us meet the needs ahead? Given the importance of our industry and how it impacts the quality of life of everyone around us, I don't know the answer yet, but I'm excited to find out. Thanks so much to VA for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. And also a special thank you to David White for sending me this selfie that he took from a car ride last week with Ron. Just adorable. You're quite photogenic, David. Anyhow, look forward to answering any questions the group may have. Thank y'all so much.